It's been mined in the Islamic state of Niger. It'll be flown on to Islamic Libya, then on to Islamic Pakistan. Tonight, Panorama reports exclusively on payments of millions of pounds by Libya's Colonel Gaddafi to finance Pakistan's efforts to build the Islamic bomb. Here at Kahuta, just outside Islamabad, under conditions of rigid security, Pakistan's attempting to transform yellow cake into bomb-grade uranium. Known within the military as Project 706, it's defended by anti-aircraft missiles. Curious Europeans who strayed too close have been brutally beaten by security police. Yet Pakistan is on the verge of building the bomb because she's been able to buy almost total access to Western technology. Project 706 owes its existence to sophisticated companies scattered across Europe who've been happy to accept Pakistani money without asking too many questions. The buying of Western technology has been carried out by a network of resourceful Pakistani agents in Europe with the help of their European middlemen. Sometimes using deception, sometimes dangling hard cash, they've been able to get from private enterprise in the West most of the components they'll need to build a bomb. Project 706 is closely modeled on a uranium enrichment plant at Almelo in Holland. Pakistan managed to penetrate the tight security here and obtain a list of over 100 subcontractors, the basis of their buying campaign. There are some grim conclusions to be drawn from the story of Project 706. It's brought the prospect of a nuclear exchange between unstable regimes considerably closer. Secondly, it's proved that any ruthless and determined government with the money and the will can get the bomb by stealth. And thirdly, the West seriously overestimated its own ability to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. Against all the evidence, Pakistan continues to deny that it's building the bomb.
I have said it on top of my voice. We are not in competition with any other country of the region in the nuclear technology. We are not making a bomb. We are sold to the idea of nuclear, of stopping nuclear proliferation in the world. But where the difference has arisen is I say that it is the right of any developing country to acquire the modern technology. And amongst the modern technology is the nuclear technology. Nuclear technology for peaceful purposes.
That's not what's happening here at PINSTEC, the Pakistan Institute of Technology, where scientists are determined to produce plutonium as the vital core of a nuclear weapon. We believe they'll be able to carry out their first test 18 months from now. When it happens, it'll be largely thanks to the organization of this man. Mr. S.A. Butt has been the ingenious quartermaster for the Pakistani bomb project. Based in Paris, he spent colossal sums of money on components for the bomb. Reportedly, Butt himself was in at the birth of the bomb at a meeting held by the late Ali Bhutto. Present were Professor Abdus Salam, later to win a Nobel Prize, Ishrat Usmani, head of the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, and Munir Khan, who was to succeed him. The date, 1972.
It was rather, like a jamboree, It was there's a great deal of enthusiasm and joy, and these were, the early days, and, Bhutto could have, Bhutto had said that anything, he could have got away with anything, his authority was unquestioned. And loyalty to Bhutto was unquestioned, and he was looked upon as the great Messiah. So he got all these boys together, and there were senior people, very senior people, and junior people, youngsters, and he said, look, we're going to have a bomb. like we're going to have a party. And he said, can you give it to me? So, they started shouting like school children, They said, oh, yes, you can have it, you can have it, you can have it. So, Bhutto was very amused, and he said, well, much as I appreciate your enthusiasm, but these are serious matters. But in any case, this is a very serious political decision, which Pakistan must make. And perhaps all third world countries must make one day, because it is coming. So can you do it? And they said, we can do it, given the resources and the facilities. So Bhutto said, I shall find you the resources, and I shall find you the facilities.
Exactly 3 weeks later, Pakistani papers reported on Ali Bhutto's triumphant tour of the Middle East and North Africa, Sudan, Ethiopia and Libya. He had to find the money he'd promised his scientists.
I was on the trip, and we visited about 16 countries, Somalia and Libya and Ethiopia. He didn't get it from Haile Selassie, I can assure you.
One of the most ecstatic welcomes of the tour was from Colonel Gaddafi in Libya. Outwardly, he was very different from Bhutto, but the two men respected each other as brothers in Islam.
Bhutto said, one of the last things he said, before his execution, that I want to be remembered as a revolutionary and as a poet. I suppose Gaddafi is a sort of revolutionary too.
But it wasn't only brotherly love that attracted Gaddafi to Bhutto. The colonel had publicly and unashamedly declared his yearning for a nuclear weapon. With the enormous wealth from his oil fields, he'd already tried to import nuclear expertise, people who would build him what he called the sword of Islam. He told a Lebanese newspaper,
people now say that this country has 50 planes and that country has 500. The day will come when they will say, this country has 3 nuclear bombs and that country has 10. Libya will not be absent when that day comes.
Earlier, he'd made somewhat naive approaches to France and China to buy an off-the-shelf bomb and had been rejected. Later, he even tried to bribe India with massive supplies of cheap oil in exchange for a bomb, and again he was turned down. Suddenly, here was Pakistan, a potential bomb supplier, with its palm outstretched, waiting for Gaddafi to put money into it. Secret meetings began in Paris between Pakistani and Libyan representatives. Secret that only a handful of men knew about them. Among them, Ali Bhutto himself and Munir Khan, head of the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission. The first meeting was in 1973. We've been given an account of those meetings by a Pakistani diplomat who was involved. Like other Pakistani informants in this film, he's been warned of a long prison sentence if he talks. His account of what happened is read.
There were various meetings in 1973 involving Libyan and Pakistani representatives. Most Pakistani diplomats in Paris were not told. Less than 10 people knew of the meetings. The Libyans wanted the entire capability. Sums in excess of $500 million were discussed. There were also discussions with other countries, including Saudi Arabia and Gulf states. Their interests were different from Gaddafi's. They principally wanted Pakistan to possess the expertise. They weren't making the same demands as Gaddafi. During the negotiations, the Pakistani side believed that a total investment, if you like to call it that, of several $1 billion was possible. But nothing like that amount ever arrived.
But massive sums of money did arrive in Pakistan. Another senior Pakistani, now in fear of a 10-year prison term, has told us exclusively that staggering consignments of money, sometimes as much as $100 million in cash, were specially flown from Libya to Pakistan. The flights began in 1975.
A plane left Tripoli for Pakistan in December and another in the summer of '76, carrying money from Colonel Gaddafi, from Mr. Bhutto, for use in the manufacture of an atom bomb. And money was always carried in suitcases by trusted couriers in high denomination notes. Mr. Bhutto told me that Colonel Gaddafi had several discussions with him on the subject at Lahore during the Islamic summit and had promised all the financial help necessary to manufacture such a bomb, but also indicated that he would like to have the first one.
But what happened on this particular occasion? How was the money got to the plane?
In suitcases, carried by a courier each time, on a Boeing flight from Tripoli via Rome to Karachi under very special security arrangements.
So one man carrying 100 million in cash?
Yes, at least 100 million. There were some special arrangements at Rome airport for security, and the impression given was that it was a VIP flight.
And there's no question that this was cash for the bomb?
Well, there's no doubt about that.
For people with the money, the technology and training had always been available. In the early 70s, when the Pakistan bomb project was born, the United States and Canada still firmly believed that it was their duty to bestow nuclear knowledge on the struggling Third World.
Who says scientists are serious? Certainly not Professor Neely, who played the piano while the students sang.
In this relaxed international atmosphere, Pakistan ordered a can-do reactor from Canada, partly because she genuinely needed nuclear power. But there was another reason. It was the first step towards the bomb. The easiest route to the bomb is to produce plutonium. To do that on a large scale, you need a nuclear reactor like this. It'll turn you out lots of spent atomic fuel containing plutonium. But to recover that plutonium, you must have a reprocessing plant. That was to be Pakistan's next step.
The reactor was our source for plutonium. Already we had begun negotiating to buy reprocessing equipment to extract the plutonium from the spent fuel. And we had the design for a plant since 1968. The experimental work was to be done at PINSTEC, the Pakistan Institute for Nuclear Science and Technology. Bhutto said a real team would be built up, and one was assembled. Money was never a problem.
On the 138th day of the year, at 02 hours, 38 minutes, 20 seconds Greenwich Mean Time, corresponding to 8 hours, 08 minutes, 20 seconds in the morning, Indian Standard Time, the graph went haywire. 3 minutes earlier, in the desert,
press conference, and he said, look, I mean, why are you asking me questions about the reprocessing plant? The IAEA has cleared it. So, what are your misgivings?
From its headquarters in Vienna, the IAEA is supposed to act as the world's nuclear guardian and ombudsman. From the millions of words that pour in here every day, an army of civil servants is in theory able to spot nuclear misbehavior and put a stop to it. Complicated safeguards were indeed built into the Pakistani agreement. But what use are safeguards if a nation is intent on building a bomb?
I can't recall that at a time when this matter was approved by the board, that they had declared their intention to go ahead with the nuclear weapon program. That I don't recall.
Pakistan undertook that no reprocessing plant nor any material produced
shall be used for the manufacture of any nuclear weapon or to further any other military purpose or for the manufacture of any other nuclear explosive device.
But let's be frank, everybody knew what the plant was for, didn't they?
Well, I suppose, all the Western countries knew.
Bhutto went home in glory. The plant which the French were to build had two alluring attractions. One, the means to fuel a new generation of reactors to ease Pakistan's power starvation, if he wanted. But two, once in operation, it would guarantee a tremendous lead in any arms race with India. But the Americans had already decided to stop Bhutto in his triumphant tracks. Dr. Henry Kissinger was given the job. Bhutto claimed that Kissinger told him, "If you go ahead with this plan, we will make a horrible example of you." Bhutto took this to mean that his downfall would be engineered by America. Pressure from the Carter administration finally persuaded the French to suspend the reprocessing deal. In Washington, there was self-congratulation on a tactical victory, an end to the Pakistani bomb. But they were wrong. The first ever nuclear bomb was made from uranium, not plutonium. What the Americans didn't know was that the Pakistanis, far from being halted in their plans, had quietly embarked on a second route to the bomb, to build a weapon exactly like the one dropped on Hiroshima, a bomb made with enriched uranium. And in this they were to be proved almost unstoppable. In the summer of 1972, a pleasant young Pakistani scientist and his British-born wife moved into this quiet suburb not far from Amsterdam Airport. Abdul Qadir Khan and his wife Henny quickly settled into the neat community of young married couples. The lace on the door and the tended potted plants in the window of number 71 Amstel made them seem models of suburban respectability. Khan didn't talk much about Pakistan, and everyone understood he intended to settle in Holland for good. He occasionally mentioned that he'd been educated at a couple of Europe's better universities. Apart from that, people remember only that the Khans were so downright nice.
For instance, he was offering cookies and sweeties to the secretaries because in his idea a girl should be a little bit fatty, let's say. That was one of his theories.
Well, that attractive women needed to be fat?
Yes, something like that, yes.
In fact, Khan was a perfect family man, faithful to his wife and devoted to his daughters. His life was going to work and looking after the family. But occasionally he took trips to his old universities, and it was after one of these that he came home with good news. He'd landed an intriguing new job. It was work that was to fling him into a world he'd never known before, the world of the industrial spy. Khan's new employers just happened to be the major subcontractors to Urenco, the Dutch-British-German consortium which runs a massive uranium enrichment plant at Almelo in Holland. Here, uranium gas is rotated at incredible speeds to produce enriched uranium. This is the sort of equipment the Pakistanis would need for their second route to the bomb, a bomb using highly enriched uranium. While he was working in Holland, Khan was approached by Pakistani agents who realized his knowledge of specialized metals could be invaluable in this alternative bomb program. Khan was a willing recruit, and he could tell them exactly what they needed to buy. To his neighbors, Khan seemed his normal, likable self. They did notice that now and then large cars with CD plates would arrive from France and Belgium and often not leave until the early hours, but they took little or no notice of it. Suddenly on December the 15th, 1975, Khan, his wife and two little girls disappeared. He'd been recalled to Islamabad. His mission in Europe had been accomplished. Back home, Khan was whisked into rather more splendid accommodation, a government villa on the outskirts of Islamabad, with the ultimate luxury, a private swimming pool. He was even given his own guards. When one European tried to approach the house, he was given a severe beating.
It was unbelievable. It didn't fit into the image we have about Khan here.
Khan's new job was to take charge of the Pakistan enrichment program. The centrifuge system is being constructed under the strictest security just outside Islamabad. The components being used here at Kahuta were all bought in Europe, the results of deals in which Khan was involved before he left. The The purchases, arranged by a network of Pakistanis in Brussels and Paris, had all skillfully sidestepped the West's nuclear export regulations. The Pakistanis are so concerned about Kahuta that they've installed French Crotale anti-aircraft missiles to protect the installation. The Indian border is only 5 minutes flying time away, and the Pakistanis have no intention of being surprised by a sudden strike by India's well-trained air force. Western intelligence sources sketch the interior of Kahuta like this. At the heart is the centrifuge system itself, surrounded by laboratories and ancillary buildings that house the control equipment, gas feed system and power supply. A guard block, power generating station and a battery of anti-aircraft guns to protect the site. Inside the Cascade Hall, several thousand centrifuges, which, once working, could produce enough enriched uranium for 6 weapons a year. The enrichment process is so complex and costly that it created the perfect cover for the Pakistanis' intentions. Almost no scientist or government official in the West believed that they would undertake such a challenging method. In fact, almost every piece of equipment inside Kahoot has come from Europe, including Britain. One of the first purchases for the Pakistani centrifuge was a batch of inverters from the Swindon plant of Emerson Electric. Inverters ensure that the current arriving at the centrifuge remains absolutely constant. That's essential when the motors have to run at tens of thousands of revolutions a minute. The management of Emerson's, both here in Swindon and at their parent company in the United States, refused point blank to talk about the inverters. But a scientist who used to work here has told us that anybody who was anybody in the company had a pretty shrewd idea of what they were for. But they weren't bothered. They were convinced the Pakistanis wouldn't know what to do with them. Indeed, he says there was a company joke that the inverters would rust away in their cases up in the hills, and then the Pakistanis would order some more. In fact, only a couple of weeks or so after the inverters arrived in Pakistan, a telex came here asking for a whole list of very sophisticated modifications, and that took the wind out of the management sails. It was another example of Western arrogance, assuming the Pakistanis had no idea what they were up to. The Pakistanis, in fact, knew exactly where to go to place their order for inverters without causing too much suspicion. To the prosperous little town of Leonberg, not far from Stuttgart. One of their go-between companies is Team Industries. The Pakistanis wanted 31 inverters, and they were prepared to pay above the going rate for them. Their middleman was one of the company directors, a Mr. Piffle.
Don't do this.
We're from BBC Television.
I know, but don't do this.
Are you Mr. Piffle?
Yes.
Mr. Piffle hoped there'd be more orders like this. On this one alone, his commission ran into thousands of pounds. Yet, I'm asking you matters of purely public interest about your dealings with Emerson's and the Pakistanis. Is it true you placed an order in 1976?
I'm Friday in England with Mrs. Thatcher together.
A later order for more centrifuges from Emerson's, worth over £1 million, was frozen by the British government. Even so, Pakistan already had enough inverters to run several thousand centrifuges. In 1976, 3 Pakistani buyers came here to Switzerland. This time they were frank about what they wanted: valves for a uranium enrichment plant. VAT, a highly specialized firm which supplies nuclear facilities all over the world, were only too happy to oblige. To cover themselves, they wrote to the appropriate government official asking whether an export license was required. The government wrote back listing sensitive items based on guidelines laid down by the so-called London Club of Nuclear Supplier Nations. The Pakistani order didn't clash with the list, and the Swiss government, anxious for firms to enter the lucrative nuclear export market, didn't ask further questions. The Pakistanis were so impressed with this aggressive selling attitude that they upped their requirements. They went to Cora Engineering, tucked away in the Alps, with an astounding request. Could Cora, they asked, design and build a system to feed gas to the centrifuges? The answer was a very rapid yes. This was no small, vague component, but a vital stage in the enrichment process to be custom-made in Europe. It was one of the biggest and most blatant orders placed anywhere by the Pakistanis. So how did Cora imagine the enriched uranium they were helping to produce would be used?
What can lead to a nuclear weapon? That is the question, of course. Nuts and bolts can lead to a nuclear weapon.
Well, they could.
And now, where do you draw the line?
The complete plant was so large that 3 chartered Hercules planes were needed to fly it from Switzerland to Pakistan. Let's suppose you were absolutely satisfied that they were going to use this plant to make a nuclear weapon. Would that have changed your mind one bit about supplying it?
I would say we first of all, we have no knowledge in nuclear weapons design or construction or anything. We wouldn't even know how to build one, how to design one. That is for one thing. And we would certainly not actively support anyone to build a nuclear weapon. Right.
But you have, haven't you?
No. How could we?
But you're coming back to your point that you don't really know or wish to know what the end product is going to be used for. Your attitude is, surely, don't ask too many questions.
No, how should we know, really, what they intend to do with it, what they want to do with it?
You're saying you had no idea at all?
No.
This ability not to know makes life easier for Mr. Butt in his role as chief buyer. He's still attached to the embassy in Paris and still placing orders. One of his recent ones was for small quantities of uranium-235 and plutonium. They were, he said, to be used by Pakistani students. So Mr. Butt had acquired the machinery and his bosses had the expertise, but they were no use without the raw material. He came to this office in Dusseldorf in search of, among other things, uranium yellow cake.
He was a member of the Pakistan embassy, and he is authorized to negotiate with that material. And he is buying that material for the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission.
But when he telephoned to press the order, was he more interested in the hexafluoride or the yellow cake? Did he say what he wanted?
Also, exactly he did not say it, but I believe he was more interested in yellow cake.
In the end, Mr. Butt and the Pakistanis found a very different supplier for their yellow cake. Islamic Republic of Niger. Need to build their bomb. The company mining the uranium is French and is headed by Monsieur Jacques Giscard d'Estaing, cousin of the French president. The site's stranded in the middle of the blistering desert, hundreds of miles from the nearest town. In temperatures which often touch 120, thousands of local laborers, supervised by French engineers, continually inhale hot dust as they extract the uranium. The billions of tons already extracted have left a monstrous crater in the desert. The The ore's processed on the spot under strict French control into yellow cake. The Islamic Republic of Niger takes its share of the mine's output. Almost all of that is sold to her Islamic brother states, Libya and Pakistan. Some of Pakistan's uranium goes via France. The rest is flown out through Libya. The uranium convoy travels 150 baking miles to a barren desert airstrip at Agadez. From there it's flown northwards across the vast Sahara to Tripoli in Libya. The last leg of the uranium trail is from Tripoli 3,000 odd miles to Karachi in Pakistan. Now, neither Niger nor Pakistan has signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, an agreement which is supposed to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. But once again, Pakistan agreed to safeguards over the use of its uranium. And once again, the words had a familiar ring. Pakistan undertook that no uranium
shall be used for the manufacture of any nuclear weapon, or to further any other military purpose, or for the manufacture of any other nuclear explosive device.
The president of Niger is Seyni Kunchi. Under his stern leadership, the country's gone from being one of France's poorest former colonies to being wealthy, all because of uranium sales. But he's only there by the grace of France and, more important, Colonel Gaddafi, who supported the coup which brought Kunchi to power. Gaddafi knows that, as with oil, uranium means power, and he'd like to become the uranium broker to the world of Islam. Kunchi is the man who could help him to do it, and thereby reinforce Libya's role in the Pakistani bomb. The uranium trade between Niger and Pakistan is partly the result of Libyan diplomacy. Kunchi, like Gaddafi, is deeply committed to Islam. It's no coincidence that almost all of Niger's uranium goes to Libya and Pakistan.
We sell our uranium to any country on condition that it participates in our development. Secondly, we expect our uranium to serve the interest of development, not of war. And we require that the International Atomic Energy Agency guarantees the sale. Therefore, we don't see why our selling to one particular country should lead to complaints. We are selling and will continue to sell to Pakistan. If the IAEA doesn't carry out proper supervision, then that's a matter for its own conscience.
The civil servants at the IAEA say they know what's happening to the uranium in Pakistan.
For the time being, the uranium is only stored in drums. It has not been moved away.
But how do you know that? How often your inspectors go there?
We have that has been inspected by us, and we know that.
But how often do you once a year, twice a year?
That again represents a confidential figure. Different installations are visited with different frequency in order to assure that we have a reasonable probability of discovering any diversion of the material.
But if that were the case, you'd have to be able to account for every pound exported from Niger to Pakistan and make sure it was still there and not being used for some improper purpose.
May I say, we should be realistic here. A pound of uranium doesn't represent a danger to mankind.
Eklund's argument would be unassailable, except that large quantities of uranium are sold to Libya, which then ships part of it off to Pakistan. Since Libya hasn't allowed the IAEA inspectors to check how much is left, the agency cannot know how much uranium Pakistan's acquired or what's been done with it. Each of these trucks is carrying about 50 or more drums of uranium on its way to Libya and Pakistan. According to Niger, it sold 150 tons of concentrate to Libya and 300 tons to Pakistan. Our informant says that Libya has sent large amounts of uranium to Pakistan. Gaddafi's done this, he says, to help to protect his role in the bomb project, to get a return on his investment.
The Libyans had always been doubtful about the quid pro quo. Pakistani scientists are training Libyans in laboratory hot cell operations. There is other training going on too, but the Libyans have made it plain. They want what they believed they were promised, full access to the technology.
Gaddafi has another good reason for backing the Pakistani bomb: Israel. The Israelis have made it abundantly clear that if some close Arab country like Libya or Iraq comes near to getting the bomb, they would use their air power to remove the threat from their sphere of influence. And there's no doubt that they could and would do it. But Pakistan's a different matter.
If it is Iraq, for example, I don't think you'll get to the point where Iraq will be within an ace of having a nuclear weapon, because the Israelis will stop it. Whether this means going out to third countries and interfering with the shipment of nuclear equipment, or it means going right inside Iraq and bombing the facility, they will do it. As you know, recently, in the recent years, the Israelis have achieved a dramatic increase in the range of their air power because of the F-15s. They can reach right into the Persian Gulf. And they have the special ordnance bombs that penetrate by kinetic energy deep into the concrete or whatever, and then they explode. So they have the full equipment to do it, and they would do it. If it came to the crunch and they knew the Pakistani weapon being transferred to Libya was sitting in a ship halfway, they would go for the ship, obviously. If it was in a dock in Karachi waiting to go, they might go as far as that. But it is, the further it is in Pakistan, the further it is a Pakistani thing as opposed to being a Libyan Pakistani thing, the less likely they are to act, because they don't feel that it is within the legitimate sphere to go that far.
So a bomb built in the comparative security of Pakistan is still Gaddafi's best bet. The small town of Sant'Angelo Lodigiano in northern Italy. It's a deeply conservative and Catholic place, but it's here that the story of the Islamic bomb's taken its most extraordinary turn. On the outskirts of town, there's a medium-sized engineering works. It's owned by a French company, and here we believe the Pakistanis are trying to resurrect their original plutonium route to the bomb. Our information is that Pakistan's covertly pressing ahead with the complex reprocessing plant that the Americans thought they'd stopped. The company's called Alcom, and it's just started work on 26 vessels and tanks made from special metals to be delivered to Pakistan by next December. The order may not have seemed important, but the contract for the work was signed in April of last year. The date is significant because the very next month, a confidential letter went out from Kojima, the French nuclear fuels company, to SGN, the company controlled by the French government.
Persistent rumors are circulating on the Pakistan affair. Some industrialists are alleged to have directly or indirectly transferred or sold sensitive and non-sensitive material to Italian industrialists. These firms are alleged to have sent the material on to Pakistan.
The boss of Alcom is Signor Aldo Tucci.
Excuse me, you can. What is your interest in this matter?
We're interested.
Your personal interest?
My personal interest?
Yes.
Is because I'm trying to find out what sort of things...
Speak slowly. I mean, my English is not so good, eh?
I'm trying to establish what sort of things Pakistan is importing and why they are importing them.
Yes, but I cannot give you any answer about this point. We have supplied a lot of materials to Pakistan. We will supply a lot of materials more to Pakistan, and it is all.
Yes, I know you supply lots of things to Pakistan, but in particular I'm interested in this order from, what's the name of the company that this order came from last year?
I am sorry, but I cannot give you the information you require. I am sorry, sir.
But you told us earlier that the name of the company...
No, sir. Excuse me, sir. The job is a serious matter, job.
What do you think these particular vessels or pool linings are for?
Offshore? Pool?
The things you are going to supply to Asiatic chemical.
No, sir. Excuse me. No, eh? No,
The reason for Signor Tucci's outburst is now clear. He'd been told by his French superiors that he was to allow no filming and to make no comment.
No.
Please.
No, sir. No. Wow. And sorry.
The parent company in Paris is called BSL. They were contractors in the original reprocessing plan. The management will neither confirm nor deny that they or their subsidiary is involved in the Pakistan order.
But one of their officials has told us off the record that all they're doing is making a perfectly innocent chemical plant. The reason they say that is that's precisely what the Pakistanis have told them.
But if the Pakistanis are, as we believe, trying to rise to something as complex as a reprocessing plant, how would they know how to set about it? The reason's simple. Virtually all of the blueprints for the plant have already been handed over to them by the French government-controlled SGN company. But if they have the plans as they have, is there anything that you can see that would stop them going ahead alone, using what means they had at their disposal?
I think that if you take any country that's industrially developed enough, which is the case of Pakistan, if the government decides to put its pressure to push one definite project, nothing can resist. A government can do anything.
The signals are that Pakistan's already made some preparations for a bomb test. Soviet and American satellites have picked up indications of tunneling, possibly for an underground trial. The site's thought to be in the remote desert area of Chulistan. If so, there's a dreadful irony about the choice of the testing ground. It's just across the border from where the Indians exploded their crude bomb. But that doesn't mean that Pakistan is aiming at the same thing.
It's just a question of how sophisticated a weapon will they design. I mean, there's a kind of a presumption in asking the question that you got a bunch of dummies that are going to work on it. There's no reason to think they're going to be dummies work on it. They might be just as good or better a physicist that's worked on it at Los Alamos. They might be some guy in there that really understands how you put the tamper on there and where you put the initiator, and just to get just a feeling of how it works right off the bat. You'll say, oh yeah, and it ought to go together like, and we can just hold her together for about a microsecond. I think we'll get about a such and such a kind of, I mean, don't assume that dummies are going to work on it. If they're motivated, they may do a hell of a job of making weapons.
We believe that in 18 months, scientists at PINSTEC, the Pakistan Institute of Technology, will have produced enough plutonium for their first test bomb. The bomb the West was convinced they could never make.
You could see it when the Chinese set off their first nuclear weapon. In this country, they say, now, how could those dummies have set off a highly enriched uranium weapon? They could never have figured out how to make a diffusion plant. Well, then the U-2 flew over and looked, they took a picture, and in Kanza province, they've got their enrichment plant. I mean, it's convenient.
Whether or not Zia survives as Pakistan's leader, he's placed an impossible burden on the country. Once the bomb is known to exist, he, or whoever succeeds him, will face enormous problems. Instead of creating security, the weapon will do quite the opposite. Libya will demand a return for all her help in the form of nuclear expertise. If the bomb is there, the military will want to test it. With mistrustful India on her doorstep, that could be a disastrous move.
Detonating the device would give one warning that X months, years down the road, they will have a real weapon. They'll have weaponized their device. And during that intervening period, the pressure on India to act to disarm the Pakistanis will be enormous. The conflict between the two countries is potentially a fatal conflict. It's about the existence of Pakistan, not about any disputed border province. And there's always the possibility that the Indians will not allow the Pakistanis to make the transition from the crude device to the weapon, and that means war.
When the dream of the Islamic bomb was born, Ali Bhutto promised, "We shall have the bomb, even if we have to eat grass to get it." Pakistan may find there's no grass to eat.